So I was talking about, let me share my screen again. I know you can't see my screen, but you can see it in a while. So we stopped here, okay? Great. So as I said here, that the driving notion of the novel, of the story, the whole story is darkness. So it's being reverberated, reiterated, repeated throughout the structure of the novel, from the title, Heart of Darkness, all the way to the end of the story. And for it to be justified, or to prove that darkness, of course, is the driving notion of the story, we have different lexical items that happen or that recur every once in a while in the story, that are very much related to the notion of darkness. So take any immense, even immensity. I mean, something that is immense, something that is you can't penetrate. So because you cannot penetrate it, it's dark. Somber, that's darkness. Invisible, that's darkness. Bewilderment or mystery, that's darkness. Black means dark. The stillness means darkness here. Shade, what is shade? Shade is darkness. Okay, so any vocabulary item here, and this is, by the way, just a kind of some sort of lexical analysis to the novel or to the story. And in this lexical analysis, you can see that all of these items just fall into one single notion, which is the notion of darkness. Now, let's look at how the inhabitants are being referred to, or are referred to in the story as dark inhabitants, okay? So if you take the dark natives, we're gonna see how the natives are very much referred to or associated also with darkness. We're gonna just have a look at different passages, and these passages shall give us an idea about the description of the natives, the depiction of the natives, the cultural and racial representation of the natives in the story, in the novel. Okay, so darkness in blackness. So, I mean, dark and black, all the same. So a lot of people, mostly black and naked, moving about like ants. So check how this very first quote is very much significant in terms of representation, a racial representation that belittles, of course, the inhabitants. Okay, so a lot of people, mostly black and naked. When we talk about black and naked, here blackness refers or is associated with nakedness, and we all know that nakedness is some sort of social disgrace, and here a black person is made to be a social disgrace. Okay, that's how the natives are racially and culturally represented in this passage here. Black shapes crouched. The black bones reclined at full length with one another, one shoulder against the three. Black figures strolled about listlessly. I mean, my point here is that darkness is represented through the word black, the term black here, and it refers to the natives. We're not talking here about the river or the Congo itself or Africa, but just about the natives and how they're racially and culturally represented here. So it's naked and black shapes. So African inhabitants are referred to or depicted as a number of figures, shapes, fragments, and that's it. So we don't have names. We don't have like a very positive description here. Well, all we have is just a number of different parts. And these parts, look, as you can see here, figures, black figures. When we say figure, figure means even the figure is dark sometimes, silhouettes, apparition. Okay, you can see a figure that you cannot recognize. Okay, so the figure means that it's not really clear. There is a lack of clarity for figure, using the word or the term figure here. Black bones, so their bones, they're fragmented again. It's a part of the body, and they are black. Black shapes. The shape, when we talk about shapes, just as figures, the term figures, they don't give you a clear idea of what they are. Okay, so it's just, you say, we want to describe something, you say, you refer to it as a shape. Shape means that you don't really know what is the identity of the person or the material, the element in general. So it's a shape. So imagine how natives are referred to, represented here as just a collection or a collectivity of figures, shapes, and fragments. Darkness, blackness, and negritude. So negritude is the new word here, and I mean to talk about negritude a little bit here in the story, because negritude is a very important concept and notion in post-colonial discourse and in colonial discourse. So a lot of mysterious niggers. A nigger was being beaten nearby. A quarrelsome band of foot-store sulking niggers trod on the heels of the donkey. So look at these quotes, how they depict the inhabitants or natives as niggers. And we will talk about negritude. That's another story which is very important. Why? Because negritude is not simply a functional term. It's a politically loaded term. Negritude is politically and ideologically loaded. Niggers, when we say niggers, negritude stirred an uproar in different countries. You know that in the States, in Europe now, if you call somebody a Negro, a black person, if you accuse, you call a black person a Negro, that you might be sued, you might be fined, you might be jailed, you might be sentenced to different sanctions actually. Okay, so negritude is not just simple functional notion or term, but it is a political term. It has become political term. It has become a ideological term in colonial, post-colonial discourse. Now, this is what I want to discuss with you here, is that this notion of negritude actually has been theorized on by two very important people, African people, Leopold Senghor and Aimé Césaire. This is what I want you to look at right now in this slide. Is based on theorizations on negritude by Aimé Césaire and Leopold Senghor. This was considered as a movement which emerged in opposition to values and codes of European civilization as they were conceived within colonial context. Now, this passage gives you an idea about negritude as a movement, okay? But of course, based on who? On theorizations of Aimé Césaire and Leopold Senghor. These two African poets and intellectuals were the first to mention the word negritude actually, and to coin the word negritude. This was considered a movement which emerged in opposition to values and codes of European civilization as they were conceived within colonial context. So negritude has been used as a movement to attack, to talk about the racial discourse purported by the European civilizations and American civilizations. Negritude was used to say that you have to stop all your brutality and atrocities actually, because you're referring to us or you're depicting us as Negroes and depicting black people as Negroes is very much racially and culturally loaded, and it's racist, of course. Okay, so this is one theorization by Gelbert and other intellectuals. Negritude for Senghor was an affirmation of African humanity that was perpetually open to revision and redefinition. What I want you actually to understand here is that these two guys, two gentlemen, came up with this term, notion of negritude here. And why am I bringing this out here? Because it's reverberating itself in the story, in the novel. And I showed you some quotes about those niggers, all right? So as a racial discourse, of course. So it was like the beginning of racial discourse by calling people with names that denigrate them, names that belittle them vis-a-vis or in contrast with the European white man. So, but these two guys, they based their theorizations and their intellect on this word to come up with this movement and to come up with a way to resist and to attack the colonial discourse by post-colonial reactions. So that's why a lot of, a lot of ideas, Aimé Césaire and Senghor came up with a lot of ideas on in terms of negritude. So for Césaire, for Senghor, for Senghor, negritude was an affirmation of African humanity, which means he says, it's fine that we are Negroes, okay, even if you call us Negroes, but by this, we may refer back to our humanity in Africa. Yes, we are Black people, okay, that's fine. However, you should be ashamed of yourself to call us such. And that's why it's just you give us more, we feel that we are more African humans when you call us Negroes, all right? He doesn't feel, for Senghor, he doesn't feel that he is touched or he's, injured by the use of negritude or Negroes, okay? Senghor, look at this passage here. Senghor presents a more concrete view from below, engaging the world as it actually exists, rather than as a series of binary oppositions between Blacks and whites or Africans and Europeans. This is very important, actually. Why? In terms of binary oppositions, you know how binary oppositions, of course, are considered like the division of the world into two, so Black and white. So for Senghor here, he presents a more concrete view from below. It means that the world is beyond just two parts. The world is a diverse place. We have a multitude of concepts. We have a multitude of perspectives in this world. And it's beyond what you think that it is actually. So for the white man, there's only a white world and Black world. And the white world comes to civilize the Black world, to humanize the Black world, okay? But for Senghor here, he theorized on the term negritude to say that there's a lot beyond this binary opposition here. There's a diversity. There's a diverse world, actually. It's not just two things. It's not two parts that are contrasted, opposed, but there is a variety of things in this world instead, okay? But Césaire defines negritude as, let's see one of the best definitions of negritude here again, as a movement. We saw negritude as a movement. Now it's the awareness of being Black. Again, Césaire says it's just the awareness of being Black. So negritude just raises the awareness of African people of their Blackness. Excuse me. The simple acknowledgement of a fact which implies the acceptance of it, a taking charge of one's identity as a Black man, of one's history and culture. So Césaire again talks about this awareness, all right? The awareness of being Black, which means that it just, the more we talk about negritude as a movement, the more we are very much affiliated to our African history and African culture, okay? So he's raising this consciousness, or what negritude does for Césaire is that it raises that consciousness of being a Black person, and we are so proud to be Black people from Africa, but it's our culture, it's our race, it's our humanity, it's not a shame. It's not something which is bad, it's good actually, all right? So for Senghor, negritude is regarded as the totality of civilizing. You have to see this passage actually, a really nice passage by Senghor, again, definition of negritude, is regarded totality of civilizing values of the Negro world. It's not racism. Look, this is what I said a while ago. It's not racism, but culture. It is situation understood and overcome in order to integrate and harmonize with the cosmos. So it's just one part to be in the diversity elements of this world. It doesn't mean that Negro means just an opposite of the white man from Europe or from America. It's just one constituent, one component of the whole multitude of components and ideas and elements that we have in this world, the diversity. He's referring to diversity. So it's the totality of civilizing values of the Negro world. For him, it's civilization. It's not racism, but culture. So negritude for Senghor here is culture. It is situation understood and overcome, integrate and harmonize with the cosmos. It's just one way to integrate with the cosmos. It's specific characteristics of African people. That's it, very simply. Okay, so Senghor defined negritude in a variety of ways. He said once that feeling is Negro. So for him, just feeling is Negro. It doesn't have a fixed definition. It has different definitions for Senghor. Senghor celebrates Africa, its rhythms, colors, and smells. So Césaire concentrates basically on the myth spun by the colonialists. That's the difference between the two here in theorizing about negritude. Now, let's come back to our novel here. So I was just I just wanted you to have an idea about when we talk about negritude, actually, because it's like a driving notion also in the racial discourse and cultural representation. That's why these two guys, you have an idea about them right now, that they were the first to coin the term negritude. And in novels, you will find Negroes and niggers, of course, then we refer to the movement of negritude, okay? So now, let me go back to Aimé Césaire and how he just defines colonialism and how he criticizes so much this discourse on colonialism, especially talking about Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness, okay? So Césaire said that a civilization that justifies colonialism and colonization is a sick civilization. And here, of course, he refers to, if we go back to the novel, we can see that the darkness is also associated with the white man. And this is a very important option or notion I want you to understand, of course, that darkness also is associated to the white man. Why? Because the white man purports, European civilization purports to come and civilize, humanize the other, which is Africa in this context, okay? But then, if you go to check, and again, if you go through the passages in the novel, and to see how Marlowe is somehow shocked by the progress made in Africa. Okay, so when he talks in different passages, of course, about the progress, he hints that there's no progress actually, especially when he moved through different stations in the Congo River. He hinted in different ways that there is no progress, in fact. So people came here to build, to develop, to humanize, civilize. But what we see is very simply the opposite, okay? So there was no progress. And in the first place, we have to ask this question, of course, that if there is progress, what is this progress? What is it for? Is it in the benefit of, in the favor of Europeans or in the favor of African people? Okay, so Marlowe, in different passages, he referred to this progress that it does not serve the inhabitants. And this is one way that Joseph Conrad actually, Conrad's novel, well, it's racial, it's racist. At the same time, we can be apologetic to Marlowe and to Conrad himself, that he is actually criticizing civilization, European civilization and white man's civilization. Okay, so especially I wanted you to probably go back to the passage where he was talking in one of the stations about the building of the railway, the train railway, and it was not built at all. In the end of the story, there was no railway. there was no progress going on. So saying it's just an idea of referring to the white man that the progress that you came for here is not actually happening. So you should normally get the hell out of here because you have no pretext, no excuse to be here. And that's why you are pretending and purporting that you came to civilize, to humanize Africa and Africans, but the reality is totally different. So when we talk about darkness, we talk about the darkness of the European soul, the darkness of the European man, the white man himself. He's dark. Why? Because he's against what he's purporting to be. He's against what he's pretending to be. And I hope you're following with me, okay? So in different passages, this is why I like Imessizer a lot here, because he talks about, he severely criticizes the European civilization for expressing this, even sadistic pleasure here. So I give you one of most important, or one, I mean, I just like this quote here by Colonel Montagnac. And this Colonel Montagnac was a lieutenant colonel in Algeria, and he said in one of his writings, in order to banish the thoughts that sometimes besiege me, I have some heads cut off. Not the heads of artichokes, but the heads of men. So imagine in the novel of Conrad, how many heads are cut off. And the idea here, or the point, is that these heads that are cut off by the colonizer, of course, it's done by pleasure. And when you kill for pleasure, you're being sadistic. And this is what Imessizer really, really criticizes in the novel, and criticizes the European civilization in general for expressing this sadistic pleasure in killings. I'm sorry again. Well, I got disconnected. I told you before that if I get disconnected, just be patient. I'll be back in a while, okay? So, sorry again. So I was talking about how Imessizer castigates, or I mean, cast onslaught, criticizes very severely the colonial discourse and the colonial practices in Africa. And he said, as I just mentioned here, that uh, uh, the heads, many heads are cut off. Imagine in the novel how many heads are cut off, okay? So give me just 1 second to look at it. We can't see the screen. Okay. Yeah, all right, thank you. Yeah, okay, so the screen is clear, I guess, right now. Okay, so let me go back to the Algerian, no, the French, I mean, colonel who was in Algeria, and he said, I mean, in a pleasurable way. So imagine this, in a pleasurable way, in order to banish the thoughts that sometimes besiege me. Just the thoughts, which means that when he's not comfortable in the native's place, I have some heads cut off. Not the heads of artichokes. He's being sarcastic here. Not the heads of artichokes, but the heads of men. Now, if you go back to the novel, how many heads are cut off? How many passages depict heads that are cut off? And I'm sorry. Well, my connection probably is really bad. Okay, so sorry again. I was talking about the criticism of Césaire to colonialism and how we can see this in the passage or throughout the passages of the novel. And I said that if you remember when Marlowe reached the station where Kurtz, and this Kurtz himself is an enigma in the story. So when we talk about darkness, nobody has been able to detect. Okay, got a chat again. Screen, okay, screen. All right, screen. Well, we don't have much in the screen right now. We just, you have to listen to me now, okay? All right, so the screen is shared again. Okay, fine. But I'm talking about how we can see the brutality of the white man, the European civilization in Africa, and how this has been criticized by different people, including this Aimé Césaire, who talked about negritude. And whenever I read one of his quotes, I want you to think or to link it with a passage that talks about that brutality in sorry.